Escape from Giant's Crown. Chapter 8. Peach-Pinned. Life was hard for Oliff, Mao, and Bartol living in the rut. Several long weeks had passed, and Mao was still confined to the attic. He spent most of his days trying to patch up the holes in the floor and the walls to make the place somewhat livable. But his arm still hurt like hell, and he tired quickly, so he slept often. They ate moldy old bread that they found outside a bakery, and after a while they didn't even mind the crusty bits. From time to time, Bartol would scavenge scraps of cloth or paper, which Mao would stitch together into blankets or curtains to patch the many holes in the attic. At night, Mao and Bartol would look out from far above the giant's back and wonder at all the work that must have gone into building such a place. Mao had always wanted to venture outside of the valley, but Giant's Crown was not at all like the kind of place he'd imagined. After the incident with the motor carriage, Mao decided to stay indoors and observe the people of Giant's Crown from above. The attic rested just above the street level, so from the broken window and the holes in the walls, he could see the goings-on in the streets. He watched as men stole from each other in broad daylight and lied to each other's faces in pleasantries and kindnesses, only to speak horribly of each other as soon as they would round the corner. Seeing the way that they treated each other, Mao became more determined to plan their escape. When not busy trying to patch up holes in the walls, he spent much of those days memorizing maps and rereading the only book that Oliff had brought from Tuksa, the Speria Traveler. It was his father's book, and it was full of maps and stories from different places. He planned several routes which could take them to Crescent Isle. But when the journey seemed too far, he would plot out a map to any place other than Giant's Crown. He couldn't take another day of watching Oliff become like everyone else around them. In fact, he couldn't see his Earth father the same way anymore at all. He couldn't imagine what kind of awful things that the mayor had him do, or if he would ever be anything like the man he once was. The worst part of it all was that Mao blamed himself for ending up in such a place. Each time he felt the pain in his shoulder, it stung twice as deep in his heart. Oliff felt the weight of the giant city crushing down upon him as well. Another day, another peach pin, another shakedown, and another argument with Mao about Crescent Isle. That damn island. Each time he thought of it, he felt more and more like he'd failed miserably. Suddenly, the route to Crescent Isle seemed like lines on sand washing away in the rain. His goals seemed like impossible dreams, and the island itself started to sound like some imaginary idea, too distant to be real. He despaired of having any hope at all. It seemed to him that the world was full of beasts, just like the one they'd fought in the dark forest. No matter where he went, it seemed that the beasts of the world would always be waiting outside whatever little safe fences he might put up, eager to consume those hapless wanderers who dared to wish for a better life. He took another swig from the whiskey flask and stumbled through the empty streets. Dreams are they're illusions, he muttered, until they try to eat you, or drag your adopted Moonken son off into the woods to die. Then you end up just getting the damn blood sucked right out of you every day just to keep him breathing. He said that last bit to the night sky as if someone out there cared to listen, but no one in Giant's Crown ever did listen. For every poor sap crying in the street about his misery, there were two others blaming him for their own mishaps. And then you die? He chuckled to himself. Nope, no such luck, sucker. You get to wake up every day, and every day you're just more of a shell of what you ever wanted to be for the kid. He was a man trapped in his own mind, and his senses were dulled. Motor carriages honked as he stumbled through the streets. The town criers belted out more announcements, names of delinquents who'd be on his list the next day, and other useless news. The bell towers rang out every hour on the hour into the night. But in his drunken stupor, every sound slowed and groaned to a hollow drumbeat, as if he wore mattresses over each ear. The unrelenting rain, which had refused to cease since the day they'd arrived, pissed down on him as he wandered down the walkway that stretched across the giant's face. There, mining tunnels poured out of the cavernous nostrils, and strange mechanical lights flashed sequences across the steeled stone eyes of the giant. They lit up like fireworks, and it made him forget, just for a moment, about all he'd been through. Singing that sad song and leaning against each lamppost he stumbled past, he ended up at the shady little watering hole just outside of the docks at the edge of the rut. He sat there for a while, watching the ships loading and unloading before they disembarked, and repeated the cycle over and over. It was a ceaseless routine, the heartbeat of the city. In the rare moments that he had to himself, when he couldn't go home and face Mao again, he came here for an escape, if only for a while. He stared off at the rain clouds in the night sky, but his heart never stopped racing. He was a good, strong worker, but he could never get ahead, let alone pay back the debt to Byron. But such a vast sum could not be acquired by any honorable means. Honorable means. He laughed at the notion. There was nothing honorable about anything in all of Giant's Crown, including himself. He had become a cog in its foul machinery, no better than the rest of them. He began to wonder if there was any other way, a way to get ahead through less conventional means. After all, this was a city of schemes built upon lies, built upon deceptions. It was an urge that had been building up since that first night working for Byron, and it was a constant temptation. It knocked on the door in the back of his mind every time his boss would give him another verbal lashing. And it was there each and every time the good doctor sent another bill for Mao's medical treatments. He would never escape it, not for as long as they called this place home. He swung his legs out over the side of the wooden dock and looked down at the tiny metal huts and shacks at the toe, some 90 stories below, where only a month before the hobos there had robbed him. But he held no grudge against them. Hell, they had less than even the miners and factory workers and the dredge. Maybe they got it all figured out, he mumbled, then took a swig from his flask. If you got nothing, there's nothing for anyone to take. In the distance, small flickering lights of departing airships trailed off over the misty mountains. From way up here, the whole world. It all just seems so small. Across the dredge, smoke from the factory exhaust pipes blackened out most of the stars, leaving a silvery sliver of a moon. Its glow seared through the fog and illuminated the huts down at the toe. Hard work is fine and all, Oliff told himself. It was how his father had raised him. But what did he know? He stared at the cracked, bruised knuckles on his hands. For all he'd done to work harder, to be faster and more dependable at his job, what had he become in the process? Still, it wasn't as though the people he roughed up were good, honest people either. Far from it, in fact. He'd seen them rob from each other in the streets, pickpocket their brothers, and steal food right out of another neighbor's home. Rumors of people going missing and straight out murdered were fairly common, just in the span of the few weeks that he'd been there. But maybe in the end, he was the one who needed roughing up. After all, what good is an honest man among thieves, liars, and murderers? Crescent Isle was just a dream. The closer he got to it, the further it pulled away, like the last train pulling out of a station, and he was way too far behind to ever catch up. He leaned his back against the wooden planks of the dock between swigs from his flask, and looked up to the sky, where ships passed just between him and the bright glowing peaches. They dangled just out of reach overhead. With his other hand he reached out and imagined holding one in his hand. "Just one more day," he muttered. By this time the words had begun to feel empty, their meaning more of a placating ritual than a true mission statement. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out one of the boxes he'd been delivering, Byron's peach pins. He looked at the small trinket between his fingers. It was smooth and well crafted, but it held no value for him. After all, his pins were merely honorary, a badge. Though it seemed like the way out for many others, he could never possibly become a peacher. He wondered how something so small could hold such importance. A few lights glimmered in the hovels crammed around the toe far below him. He thought of the men who lived there and the wheel of desperation that ran around the clock, driving each one of them to madness. He thought of Mao and how he'd let the boy down, all in the name of keeping him safe. The future felt hopeless. "None of us ever really stood a chance," he said. His hand tilted. The open bag leaned over the edge. With one movement of his finger, he could upend Byron's entire peach pin operation. He could make every hobo in the toe a bona fide peacher. "It's a smart move, if it works," came a familiar voice from behind. "Of course, if it doesn't, well, you're an idiot." Startled, Oliff snatched the satchel of pins back. A blurry figure in a rubber trench coat stood beside him, Dr. Wheezy. Oliff pulled the satchel close, patted its contents securely as he fastened the latch. "Hey, Doc." He took another swig of his whiskey. "If you got another bill, you can just drop it off at the office." Dr. Wheezy scoffed. "On the contrary, my dear friend, on this occasion, I can assure you that I'm on far less official business." Dr. Wheezy adjusted his eyepiece and stared off into the ocean of clouds. "I couldn't help but notice your unfortunate condition. But before you do anything very, very stupid, may I offer you an alternative solution?" Oliff shrugged. To what exactly?" The doctor spun around dramatically. "Why, your dilemma, of course. By now you've begun to realize that you're not much more than a pawn in the mayor's game. Likewise, a giant's crown is not all that it seems." Cut to the chase, Doc. I'm pretty busy, Oliff replied, choking down more drink than he could swallow in a single gulp. Well, given the right circumstances, one such pawn may change the tide. Even overthrow the board entirely. Not following the metaphors, Doc. Just spit it out. What are you trying to say? The doctor rolled his one good eye and sighed, then rustled through his own satchel. Well, to put it bluntly, with this device, even a pawn may end the game. He held up a small mechanical box-shaped device with blinking lights flashing in time with the ones attached to the giant's sleeping eyes.